Hello and welcome to another Walkthrough Wednesday. David, what is today?
Today is Pi Day, March 14th, because 3.14159, those are the first few digits of pi. And so what we have planned today is to practice drawing some circles.
Yeah, so we figured that we'd give you a little bit special edition of Walkthrough Wednesday with Pi Day. And so we're going to be utilizing the HTML5 canvas element to create what you can see on the screen behind us. This beautiful, beautiful basic pepperoni pizza, or pie, depending on which locale you may be in. But it's pretty straightforward, it's pretty simple, but it's pretty fun. Just throwing out some code based off of Pi Day. So David, you want to give us an overview of the canvas element while I switch over to the editor?
Sure. So the canvas element is something that was introduced in HTML5, and it's really great. So canvas is an HTML element, and we can access it from our JavaScript through the DOM. So you have to get it by ID. You have to select it in some way. Have to get a reference to it in your code. And once you have that reference, then you have access to the drawing context. So you're going to see us working with the context a lot. The context is used to draw shapes, draw lines, draw arcs. It's also used, we can define colors. So you can define the color of the context and then tell that context to make a stroke or fill in a shape. So the context is really important, and you're going to be seeing us use it a lot in this example.
Yep, so I've gone ahead and pulled up the index.html boilerplate that we've already created. This is what we saw previously, but when I go back to the browser, you're going to notice that there is no more pi there because I cleared out the script that's actually creating those strokes on the context that David was talking about. But the crux of all of this is this canvas element here. So you can see in the HTML that we have this canvas element. It's just an HTML element that's native to HTML5, and we've added an ID, width, and height attribute for this element. And then we've also given it some context in case somebody's trying to view this web page that in an older browser that doesn't support this canvas element. So if that's the case, they're just going to see this text instead of what is being rendered to newer versions of browsers. So this is interesting and everything. We've pulled in Bootstrap to make the Jumbotron a little appealing and have some CSS classes that are default in Bootstrap. And we're also pulling in this script here, which is where all the action happens. So we'll go ahead and go over there. And you may have seen this earlier, but I went ahead and cleared out all the other stuff to focus on what this context is. So the first thing, as David said earlier, we have to pull in that canvas element into our script, and we have to define this context, or CTX is what we're calling it. And if I go back to the browser really quick and refresh, you're going to see that pi goes away. So now we're going to actually build this very quickly for you just to kind of give an overview of this canvas element, what we need to do. So, David, what is the first thing that I need to do for this?
So just pointing out real quick, we are getting this element by ID, myCanvas. So on the HTML side of things, the canvas does have an ID of myCanvas, spelled and capitalized the exact same way. Back in the script file, we got this starter code from a code example. We're on a newer version of JavaScript, so we want to be using let. So we'll go ahead and swap that out. If it's an option for you, always make sure you're using let instead of var. So we retrieved the canvas. We stored it in a variable we chose to call C. We then used C in line 2. We said, hey, canvas, give me your drawing context, your graphics context. And we stored that in a variable called context, but you're going to see it abbreviated CTX pretty much in all examples you see online. So we can continue to call it context, or we can change it to CTX. It doesn't really matter which name we choose. So the first thing we want to do, I think the simplest thing would just be to draw a circle on the screen. So what we can do is we can begin a new path.
Path.
So we're going to begin a new path.
So I'm going to give some comments here for the contents of this pizza. So the first thing I want to do is kind of work my way from the background up to through the cheese and into the pepperonis. So starting with the crust here, we're going to draw and fill that circle in. So I have a new path, and then the next thing we're going to need to do is, the circle you can think about as an arc, and then you fill in that arc. For a full circle, it would be the full arc, so 2 times pi for that full rotation. And the way that you would do that in the canvas element here is just with this arc method. And VS Code is going to give us some very helpful feedback here. So the X, Y, and radius values are going to be the coordinates of this canvas element. And so I'm going to say that I want this to start in the initial position for 100, 100, and the radius to also be 100. So it's going to take up a fair amount of that full canvas that I defined in the HTML. Now for the start angle, I want it to start at 0, and I want it to go all the way to 2 times math.pi.
And that's not in degrees, that is in radians. So that is 2 pi radians, which is an entire loop around a circle, so a full circle.
Yeah, so quick math tidbit here, 2 pi would be 360 degrees. Now this anti-clockwise Boolean, if you're familiar with math at all, you might be thinking about the 4 quadrants of a graph. That's at least what we did when we looked at this, and that goes counterclockwise. So the way that the canvas arc usually is painted, it starts clockwise. So we're going to go ahead and say this is true so that it paints this counterclockwise, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to be filling in the full circle anyways. But if you're trying to do like just 180 degrees or pi for that end angle, you're going to notice that it's either going this way or this way when it's being painted, if that makes any sense. So once we have this arc, then we need to set a color, because by default it's going to use black. So maybe since our crust, maybe we want a nice golden flaky crust, so maybe like an orange color. All right, that works for me. We had pizza for lunch today, so I'm not really that hungry right now, but
got to take advantage of those $3.14 pizzas.
Yeah, full pizza for $3.14. Can't go wrong there. And now
we have told the context we're beginning a path. We've told it that it's going to be an arc. We've even told it how it's going to style the fill. Now we just need to tell it to fill. So we're going to run the fill method.
All right. So once we have all this defined, let's go back to our browser and see what that does. There's our crust.
That's tasty.
So, or just a really big dot. But for Pi Day, we're going to say that it's a crust. So we're slowly assembling our pizza here. So let's go back to the code where all the fun happens. And now we need our cheese. So we can do this very manually by just continually using this context to build this up very slowly. So there's not really much that's going to change here other than the fill style for the color and where we're starting this arc. So if we're making a circle and we're using the fill option, then everything inside of this arc that's being drawn on the canvas element is going to be filled with this color, as we just saw. And so you can think about building up the cheese or concentric circles in this canvas element. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm just going to copy this context here. And instead of it starting, or instead of the rate, I want it to start in the same position. So remember, this is X and Y for the start position. But I don't want this circle, which is going to be yellow for the cheese, to take up as much area as the crust. I want it to be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to say this is 85, just to see what that looks like. We can kind of play with those values to see what happens. But now it looks like I have the crust just on the outside, very nicely baked, and then we have the cheese taking up the entirety. So this is exactly how I like my pizza. I don't want to see the crust in the middle. I want to see all of the cheese, preferably like triple cheese, a little bit of bacon and jalapenos. Now I'm starting to get hungry. So now we have the cheese. So let's add some pepperonis. Now this is where it gets a little tricky, because we don't want just one massive pepperoni like we just did with the cheese. I guess you could do that, but it seems like a little bit of pepperoni overkill. So let's say we want a nice equal distribution of pepperonis, and maybe it's just me and David splitting this pizza. So we're gonna have like, maybe we split it in half, but it's kind of hard to eat half of a pizza. So we're gonna split it into 4 slices. We're not gonna show you those slices, but we're, aspirational Imagineers here. So we're gonna just use our imagination, and we're gonna have 4 pepperonis for each slice. No, I'm sorry, 1 pepperoni for each slice. I don't want to do 16 pepperonis. So let's do that. This first pepperoni we're gonna say is red, and let's just see what this looks like. So this is gonna change our cheese to red because we still have all 3 of those circles, but now it's gonna have the same radius as the cheese. So I want this pepperoni to be much smaller. David, do you have a number in mind for the radius of the pepperoni?
Let's do 10.
All right, 10. Sounds good. So now let's see what this does. Yeah, awesome. So now we need to change the position of this so it's not right in the middle.
Let's do 50-50.
50-50. Okay, so it's right there on the border. That's good. And let's do one more. We could do
65-120.
Go back, check out this pizza. Okay. Essentially doing 1 pepperoni per quadrant. And you could flip it, do like
111, 111.
111. 11. That's going to put it close to the 4th quadrant. Okay, we might go to 5 or 6 pepperonis. This is looking like a pretty weak pepperoni pizza. And then we need 1 up in that first quadrant.
You could do 65-120.
No, we did that, so we could do
135-55.
Yeah, that could work. Get it close to that. Okay, good. And let's add 2 more. So if this was 135-55 and this was 50-50, so this would probably be about 80 or 100.
80-60.
80. Well, I'm thinking, yeah. So let's try that.
We're being very precise with our pepperoni placement.
Yeah. This might be the last one.
So this first one, remember, is the x coordinate. So that's left to right distance, and the second one is the y coordinate.
Okay. Yeah, that works. We'll reserve this side for like the people that don't really like pepperonis.
Right. Yeah.
But there you have it. I mean, this was we've got our pizza close to what we started with. We got 5 pepperonis on here, a nice brown crust with or orange crust with our cheese, mozzarella cheese. So that's it for this walkthrough Wednesday. Now, David, is there any suggestions you might give people that were following along to maybe make this a little bit more code friendly?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. So go back to the code real quick. So you can see like how drawn out this is, if you'll pardon the pun. So we have all of these steps here, and there's a lot of repeated stuff, right? Like it's always from 0 to 2 pi because we're always drawing a full circle. We're always using true because we prefer anti-clockwise circles. Now the x and y coordinates, the origin of the circle, they are changing, so that's not always the same. So you can think of like, maybe we could create a function called draw circle that takes in an x, y, and a radius, and a color. That's pretty much the only 4 things that, if we wanted to write one function that could just constantly draw a circle and be able to change stuff, then we would need 4 parameters in this example. We need the x and the y coordinate, the radius to see how large we want the circle, and then the color. Everything else, because we know we're drawing full circles, because we want them to be anti-clockwise, that is all going to be the same. So that's stuff that we can have inside this function that doesn't change, and then we just rely on those parameters for the dynamic values.
Yep. So just, I would suggest that you do this on your own, so you can kind of play around with this code. But just the general schematic would be this code needs to be inside this function. So you can call this function and perform all of these operations on the canvas element with those parameters that are being passed into the function. So there's a lot of ways that you can play around with these canvas elements, and we just really touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can do and the capabilities of it.
If you're more like graphic design oriented, you can even specify the blending mode of the context. So like multiply, screen. So when things overlap and stack on top of each other, by default, they just stack on top of each other and there's no interaction. But you can make it where they darken and lighten and intersect and things like that. So.
Yeah. So this has been fun, and we wish everybody a happy Pi Day. Hope you've had some pie or pizza or something. Maybe did some math, learned something that you didn't know before. So we're going to be signing off for this video, and we'll catch you in the next one.